Coming up next on Insights on PBS Hawaii, is Kakaako moving in the right direction? Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff. Kakaako is being billed as the new social epicenter of Honolulu. The plan is for a community where people can live, work, and play with transit stops, luxury and affordable housing, retail, and green open spaces for recreation. But are the people who are actually making the decisions really keeping that dream in mind? Is Kakaako moving in the right direction? We invite you to join our conversation tonight by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. Now to our panel. Donna Wong is the Executive Director of Hawaii's Thousand Friends, a statewide nonprofit group that works to protect natural and cultural resources. Peter Apo is a trustee at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, which will control 10 parcels of land on the Makai side of Kakaako. Anthony Ching is the Executive Director of Hawaii Community Development Authority, which oversees the redevelopment of Kakaako. Prior to this appointment, he was Executive Director of the State Land Use Commission. George Atta is the Director of the City of Honolulu's Department of Planning and Permitting. Now, my first question, we talked a lot about the utopian dream, and for Mr. Ching, Tony, if we took a picture of the proposed plans that are now on the table and moving through, how closely do you think they resemble the vision that was expressed way back in 1976 when Kakaako was given over to the state of Hawaii?
Well, to be quite honest, in 1976, I believe the initial vision saw a more Blade Runner type of view with elevated walkways and high-rise towers. And that obviously is not the picture that we see here today. I think for a reality check, one can only look so far as the Halekulea Place that is opening on Tuesday next week. And that's going to be 204 affordable rental units in 20 stories. And so it's a high-rise apartment rental. And it's meant for families with incomes of about 60% of AMI. That sounds funny, but that's about $40,000 for a single. That would be about perhaps 60 or so for a family of 4.
Okay, and now Donna, same question to you. If you look at what the potential was of Kakaako, perhaps what people were thinking at the time might have been different, as Tony says, our vision of the future may have been different, but given that we're now in current time, how does Thousand Friends, the environmental community, feel about what's going on there?
Well, I disagree with Tony, which is not a surprise. That, and the legislature said in their Act 153 that HEDA was result in communities which serve the highest needs and aspirations of Hawaii's people. And I pretty much don't think that all these high-rises so close together with no green open space, blocking all the views, is really what the legislature had in mind.
Okay, now, George, the city has kind of been cut out. You guys are involved quite a bit at the end of the process and making sure things get hooked up properly and traffic flows and so on. But overall, does the city have a position on where Kakaako seems to be going today?
We don't have a position on the current master plan, although we had comments when the plan was being adopted. Because we don't actually have control of the zoning, we haven't really created a vision for Kakaako. It's sort of like it's not our kuleana, so we don't have our own separate vision for Kakaako.
In terms of, though, how it relates to other properties around it, do you feel like it's appropriate to what you folks do have planned for the areas around it?
It's different, and in the surrounding areas we do have ideas. And the other thing is the city controls like Alamona Park and Blaisdell Center. So there are big chunks of land that's in Kakaako that we do control, and we have our own ideas about that. And we do have ideas about how those things should be integrated with the other parcels in Kakaako.
Okay, now Peter Apo from OHA, you folks are one of the stakeholders now with considerable property on the Makai side. This is toward the ocean side of Ala Moana Boulevard. What do your folks envision for that property, and particularly, how will OHA as a developer perhaps approach this differently than, say, some of the developers inland?
Well, if I can just first set some context. We're brand new kids on the block. And the properties that we have as a result of an agreement, some people don't like to call it a settlement with the state, owed the Office of Hawaiian Affairs $200 million over, long story short, some back rent. We preferred cash. After 4 governors, over 17 legislative sessions, we're not able to work it out, and Governor Abercrombie came forward by offering us 10 parcels in Kakaako, Makai. So it was an opportunity that we decided to seize. So we are the new kids on the block. We have been, to date, a cash trust. That is, all our revenue came in a way of cash that we deposit in investment scenarios. Our first experience at being a landowner of commercial real estate. We own land in other places like Waimea Valley, but those are called legacy lands. So this commercial real estate is about creating the base of the trust. We serve a beneficiary group of Native Hawaiians, over 200,000 who live in Hawaii, and we have another 250,000 that live on the mainland. So it's a huge responsibility, and it's a very expensive undertaking. And we run a plethora of programs, everything from healthcare, education. We support 13 charter schools, etc. So I wanted to make sure that the context in which we have become a commercial landowner, and that we are not a stockholder-driven corporation. We are not highest and best use, build value, sell it, and run. We're here to stay, and we want to do something good with Kakaako Makai, and set an example as to what good development ought to be.
Let me ask, in that context, and in line of the questions I just asked the other 3, how do you feel about what's going on the other side of Ala Moana Boulevard? Is that anything close to what OHA would consider for its parcels?
You mean what's going on now?
Yes, the kind of projects that are being approved, yeah.
Oh, you mean on the Mauka side?
Absolutely.
Well, you know, I tend to, my memory, which I was in the legislature in the 80s, is that the vision for Kakaako was supposed to be basically a high-rise live, work, and play. They had formulas back then of percentages for affordable housing, et cetera, you know. So what I see rising now, that's taken a long time, is kind of what was envisioned, as far as I recall. If my memory is faulty, I apologize. But all these years, that's kind of what I had in mind. And I think what the problem is that it's taken so long to get to the build-out part that there's been a loss of community memory as to what the commitment was back by the legislature, you know, when they enacted that back then. So.
Interesting point, Donna. Let me throw that to you. I mean, is this something that's just sort of happening naturally, economically, and really indeed what everybody expected, or what's wrong with what's happening now?
Well, general growth properties, you know, they saw the future, and then when Howard Hughes bought out general growth properties, they weren't coming here to keep the small businesses that made Kakaako that we all use. They're all going. So it's being driven by bigger profits now. Everybody wants to get on the bandwagon, and let's develop it. And the way that the rules and everything are now being laid out, it is being developed at the highest and best use.
Tony, you've had now 3 people banging on you just a little bit, not too serious from one side, but certainly Donna's are very serious. And we did get a caller question, Wendy from Makiki, who brings up exactly that small business point. And as I recall from the plans I saw back in the 80s, those platforms that the high rises were to be built on had down below a lot of space for small business. They called it mixed use at the time. What's ever happened to that? I mean, is there going to be room for small businesses in the Kakaako as it's moving today?
So the mantra from a zoning standpoint from the authority has always been and continues to be a mixed use. And so I think the description of Kakaako as just high-rises is inaccurate in that it's actually a set of neighborhoods that we have established and recognized for existing patterns. Sheridan Track is an existing neighborhood. We do not look to change that the nature of that particular neighborhood. Central Kakaako, bounded by Cook Street, P, Koi, Waimanu, and Queen Street, is characterized by 5,000 square foot lots, which will never be developed as high rises because you just take too many of those lots. That character we're obliged to preserve, and if you look at it today, that's the haven for your air conditioning repair and other service functions, pet items, there's childcare, there's a variety of places. Now, so it's important to realize that much of the large growth is occurring in what we call the Pauahi and Oahe neighborhoods, which are characterized by large development lots and single landholding by Kamehameha Schools and Howard Hughes Victoria Ward Limited.
Okay, George, let me ask this question as a longtime planner, an expert in these sort of things. Is it really realistic to expect that, say, an air conditioning repair shop or a place that might have chemicals or noise or something like that can really exist alongside a residential high-rise? And I think that possibly what Tony is saying is that there will be separations, but it's not that big a space. I mean, how realistic do you think it is to expect that small businesses will survive this process?
I think it's possible. It's not easy, but I think it's possible. Zoning was set up in the old days to separate uses that were incompatible with each other. Mixed use kind of brings to question that strategy of separation. And nowadays, the nuisance things of noise, odors, chemicals can be, handled better than it could in the old days. So I think there are ways to mix and separate within a block and still make it possible. I think the more difficult thing is not so much the technical, physical aspects of the nuisance and separation, but really whether the question of property values can be controlled or managed in a way that it won't drive out small business.
Okay, that's kind of along the lines of what I was asking. Peter, did you want to?
Yeah, just one thought. I recall a lot of discussion going on back then that was fearful that if we did not do better urban planning, fearful of urban sprawl, that the community would be so dispersed and the cost of that, infrastructure, et cetera, the traffic. And so Kakaako Makai, as I recall, the conversation was to create a live, work, and play place where people could leave their automobiles, walk to work, walk to the movies, walk to a restaurant, walk to get a haircut, walk. That's what my impression was, as I recall back then. The urban sprawl occurred anyway. So, but I don't think it's too late. I think the vision of trying to create, bring people back to the city and create, because the technologies today and design things really work. I hope that we can work that part out.
We should point out, you mentioned earlier that you spent quite a bit of time as a state legislator,
Yes.
and so you have another perspective in addition to being an OHA trustee.
Yes.
A couple questions are right in line of what we've been just talking about. Kalea and Waikiki, I support the high rises in Kakaako. Put the high rises in the city, save the ag land. Exactly what you were just commenting on. And let me bring that back to you, Don. I mean, that's very, very frequently pointed out, a green reason for Kakaako. No?
It didn't work. If anybody's paid attention, Land Use Commission just approved redesignation of Koa Ridge and then Ho'opili. So Ho'opili is going to have 11,000 homes, and that's where the Loon Farms are, and they raise produce that we all eat. So far, that hasn't worked.
Let me ask, why do you think it hasn't worked? What do you think is going on that has made it so that this is not turned into a place to attract people who are otherwise buying subdivision homes?
Why Kakaako hasn't worked?
Well, you mentioned that now we're
planning?
approving these subdivisions. What do you think is going on?
Well, I think starting with the Land Use Commission, they just didn't look at the value of the land. And their argument that because it was within the urban growth boundary as identified by the city was that it was therefore it was slated for growth. That urban growth boundary just came into play, I think, in 2000, and it's been fluid. Now they're changing the name of it. It's not going to be called an urban growth boundary. I don't know what the definition's going to be, but you know, the line just always keeps moving.
Tony, let me, on those, Tony, that keeps moving, that sucker, that little line, yeah. But Tony, in terms of when you and your staff look at a proposal and you start trying to ask yourselves, you know, does this meet the rules of Kakaako or something? Do you have a big picture in mind that, oh, wait a minute, maybe this is blossoming to the point that we're not going to be able to plan it, we're not going to be able to truly control it, the economic factors that George mentioned will just overwhelm us and we'll end up with another Waikiki as opposed to a truly livable area?
You know, in '76, and I believe in the studies that were done, the population projection was expected to be 45,000 people in a very dense, high-rise type situation. We have ability to, through zoning, to control floor area that's developed, and so the floor area ratio is 3.5 in general, which is in sync with the surrounding area.
What does 3.5 mean?
3.5 means if you have a 10,000 square foot lot, it's a multiplier. So a 10,000 square foot lot with a 3.5 FAR or density ratio means that you can build 35,000 square feet of floor area. So the allowable floor area or density that's projected is in concert with the outlying areas or with the city in general. And so I'm going to have to say that at this point, given that kind of ratio, you can, by arithmetic, project how much floor area you could build in Kakaako, and you can then project how many people might live there. Our current projection is that by the year 2030, there might be 30,000 people living there. There's currently a 12,000 person population at this point.
And of those 30,000, I want to ask a question that came from Bill and Mililani. How many people will be living in the area when development is complete? Will automobiles be allowed in the area? I think that development at 2030 is far from complete, right?
Yes, certainly.
So 30,000 in 2030, how many do you see when it's actually complete, say in 2040 or 2050?
Well, I actually see that in the next 2 to 5 years that there'll be just over 5,000 units at current count that might be developed. If you project that there might be 1.8, and that's the current ratio, people living in each one of those units, that might be another 10,000 people. So it would take us to 22,000 people in the next 5 years. So thereafter, what's our ultimate population? It depends on, again, the pace, but the environmental impact statement that we're conducting might project perhaps still that same 30,000, but perhaps we might go up with transit-oriented development or the attractiveness of people living in the city, that we might end up at perhaps back to a 40,000 level. That's our projections.
George, do you have any reaction to those kind of projections? I mean,
I think that's potentially realistic, and in that sense, I think that we have a similarity of vision with the city in the sense that our overall general plan does direct city into the growth into the transit corridor, and we are looking at, with our TOD planning, trying to create this high-density urban live, work, play communities around the station, and we've seen the numbers, and we've done. And Tony's correct about the FAR densities. It's similar to adjacent areas in the city.
Yeah, let me pursue that question. Compare that kind of density at build out to some of the other areas we have in Honolulu. Like, is that like Waikiki, or is that like Salt Lake, or is that like Aiea? Can you give me a sense of what that looks like?
I would say it's well, the 3.5 FAR is sort of like Waikiki, and so. And again, the FAR and density is really, it just tells you one story about the density, and Tony knows this very well, that the density can be high or bulky, and so the design of that density within a block can vary tremendously, and how much open space you can get within that block. So when you ask about the character of it, does it look like Waikiki or Salt Lake? It can, in a way, can look like Salt Lake. It can look like Waikiki, and it's a lot of it is influenced by design and master planning.
Peter, let me ask you this question, and I think I may have seen you cringe a little bit when you said, oh, it's kind of like Waikiki. Many of us who remember Waikiki even before it was like it is now, and we know how the Hawaiian people generally feel about the concrete development of Waikiki. How does that make you feel as a trustee of Hawaiian Trust now with property that could look like Waikiki?
It's not going to look like Waikiki. I guarantee it. It's not going to look like Waikiki. Of anyone in Hawaii, Hawaiians have been the biggest victims of bad development, of alienation from the land, and et cetera. So the trustees, with our 200,000 beneficiaries that live here, we can't go there. So our challenge is how to balance commerce and culture. What we hope is that our 10 parcels, and in combination with the other acreage on the Makai side of Alamano Boulevard, will sort of serve as a front yard to the Mauka side of Alamano Boulevard, where people can come, celebrate themselves, small businesses can thrive. It's a challenge to try to make the numbers work. But that's what trustees envision, is a place for local people. And wherever local people go, visitors will come. But we're not going to target and build out highest and best use. We got to do some bad. We are not stockholder driven. We have a fiduciary responsibility, true, to try to maximize
revenue.
On the other hand, we also have part of that fiduciary duty is to do something that Hawaiians can be proud of and that everybody can be proud of. It's easier said than done, but that is the commitment of the trustees.
Donna, again, going back to my question to George, when you picture those kinds of ratios, what else, I know how you feel, I can just feel it, but I mean, what should they be doing differently there? I mean, you've got this economic pressure. What do? Just say stop, or what do you do?
First of all, you're throwing out all of the numbers, okay? And all the pala. You got all that, all on paper. Is anybody looking at the infrastructure? Is anybody at Sand Island? How much more can it handle? It can handle those other 30 condos that are coming up? That's okay? No problem with sea level rise? No climate change?
Willing to talk about poop
No.
and the flowing of poop.
Well, actually, let her finish.
For residents, they already have the odor. Who knows where it's coming from? They're walking around Kakaako, the ones that live there now, and they're having that issue. So, and it's not just development in Kakaako. There's going to be more in Waikiki. And as the numbers for tourists keep rising, 8 million now and climbing, so you've got in between Waikiki all along, the Aiea, all the way down. So everybody else has got to stop because we're going to develop here. I don't see any comprehensive integration or review of what is our capacity, what is the carrying capacity of all of this.
This is exactly why we brought George in today.
I can say the analysis has been done, and we've had preliminary assessment along the entire rail corridor. So we're not just looking at Sand Island, but also Honolulu and the system capacity all the way. And there are trouble spots. And the Sand Island treatment plant, the second digester is intended to alleviate the capacity problems there. So we know where the choke points are, we know where the deficiencies are, and we have things related to both the consent decree as well as the transits. And the mayor has given the ENV department that both the consent decree and TOD are priorities. So we've looked at the system, we know and we've mapped where the choke points and deficiencies are. And so we're scheduling repairs and upgrades. So we're aware of the problem.
Are we all, I'm sorry, Donna, but I'm sorry. I should let you ask the question, but that occurred to me because I want to interject on behalf of our viewers. Leonard in Waikiki asking specifically, what do we do with the garbage, the water, and the sewage? Are these issues being addressed? Now, getting back specifically to what Donna is saying about Kakaako, after the HCDA approves a project, it ends up in your lap to figure out whether things are connected properly, whether things are happening.
Yes.
Do you have in Kakaako problems with the system that cannot handle even the existing uses?
Not immediately. And I know Donna mentioned the odor problem, and this is something that may sound funny to the layperson. The odor problem is not a capacity issue. The odor is not coming because the sewer is over capacity. It's a different problem, and sometimes you get odor because there's not enough flow going through a pipe. So the two are different problems.
Okay.
Yes.
So build more. Okay.
No. But I'm just saying that when you say odor, people assume there's a capacity problem, and that's not true.
Okay, but in terms of the balancing act the city has to play with its own projects, transit-oriented development,
Yes.
With Waikiki growing, with the demand, multifamily houses being developed upstream in residential areas, how are we, who's going to ultimately pay for this investment that needs to be made for these highly dense areas? Is it spread out through everybody, so I'm paying, or is it just the people who are in that particular area?
No, it's everybody. Yeah, the sewer system is with sewer hookup charges and the sewer fees that go with the water bill. Everybody pays for the sewer system.
And so, why is that good?
Why is that good?
I know it's a broad policy question, maybe beyond yours.
But that's true of any major infrastructure. It's never locally paid by the local community. Our major roads, the board of water supply, pipeline, the sewers, anything of a major infrastructure capacity is paid by everybody. It's not paid by the local geography.
And
Although when you have developers, for instance, Ward Avenue, there are two mains going down there. Right now, a 60-inch main that takes actually the upstream waste and does not take local waste. There's a 14-inch main that takes up the local poop along Ward. As a function of the development that's occurring in the area, the Howard Hughes Victoria Ward people will be charged with upgrading that 14 to a 30. And that would then conceivably take, from a capacity, it would then support all the planned development in that area.
Also, the planned development is outside of Kakaako?
The planned development locally. So remember that 60-inch main takes care of the rest of the stuff that flows through, and the 14-inch main is something that needs to be upgraded to handle local production. So again, as George mentioned, it's where capacity issues are within the purview of the developer. They're going to contribute to that capacity issue. They are obliged specifically to address at their cost that particular issue. George mentioned with respect to odor, that odor is not a capacity issue, and there was sworn testimony provided at a recent hearing, and it confirms that the 78-inch main along Oahe Street is actually flowing at under capacity, and the flow rate is not what it should be. Now, it then creates a situation that there are more off gases created because there's more capacity and less flow. It's not moving fast enough through there. So it creates, in some situation, a odor or operational issue. And actually, I believe if you go down into the area, well, there was work recently, and they've capped it all off, and I don't believe you'll find that odor. So again, capacity versus operational issues are two different things.
Let me change the subject.
That's go right ahead.
I'm not enjoying it. It's interesting, but you have to be a little bit on the wonky side, and it's a little warm in here. No. Here's a nice question. I enjoy this question. I've lived in Kakaako for 20 years and campaigned for a grocery store. There are none in the area, and this makes it difficult for elderly people. Are there plans to build a grocery store?
If it's questions directed to me, the authority has received a application for a Keaho Lane, and part of the planned development there could include a grocery type store.
Could.
Could.
What does that mean?
Because until it's built and then the grocer is there, Donna wouldn't let me get away with just promising, it. So it could, or there's plans to. And so another thing, and not to get into the stats, but a grocery store like Times might be, or Safeway or other, might be 35,000 square feet. And the one that I patronize services the Kaimaki area. And in the Kaimaki area, there might be 100,000 people. And so there's a Safeway in Kapahulu, there's a Foodland. In Kakaako, remember, I said that there's a 12,000 resident population. So, you know, with the growth will come the services. Build it and they will come. And so really prescription drug services are another item because we have many elderly in the area. So I do believe they will be coming.
Okay, I'm going to follow up with you on that in just a minute, but right now I need to speak to our audience briefly. Tonight we're asking, is Kakaako moving in the right direction? And we invite you to join our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. Call 973-1000 on Oahu and 800-283-4847. 1-800-283-4847 from the neighbor islands. On that point, and you know, we talk about, and this is for everybody, we talk about this concept of, you know, you're talking in numbers, you know, that, oh, if there's enough people, then someone will come and invest in a store. But I thought we were talking about a community where you're saying first everything's in walking distance. So actually, you know, isn't that sort of contrary? Is that, if you rely on the economics, do you end up with stores within walking distance? Donna, you want to try that?
You just take a look at Kapolei, the second city.
That's
right?
where I live.
That was supposed to be livable and walkable. You can't walk to the market.
I was going to say, was it really?
Right? That's exactly what it was. It's exactly what it was going to be. All the development is outside, and it's just a strip of commercial. So that is not walkable, right? You got a smaller area here with Kakaako. You're going to have probably a greater population and a denser area. You need those services, but I've also heard, and we need to watch as we go along, how many of those units are going to be sold to offshore as vacation rentals.
Yeah, let me
going to be investments, and not the population that lives here.
You know, that's a question I kind of wanted to take over to Peter.
I'm taking notes. We're going to have grocery stores. We're going to have barbershops, beauty parlors. Absolutely.
We got this on tape, you know.
But we need people, so we need some residential on our end.
Let me ask. Yeah, Peter. You know, you made a comment that I thought was really telling a few moments ago. You said that Hawaiians were the biggest victim of overdevelopment. Describe a little bit of why there is that perception. What is that? What do you mean by that? And how do you help this community avoid that again?
Good planning, really good planning. I think it would help to have an informed electorate so that when issues come up, people speak with, knowing what the situation is. I think the growth model in Hawaii, I'm going to kind of go up to altitude. The growth model in Hawaii has suffered a lot because we're kind of like a movie, and the script is being written in boardrooms thousands of miles away by people who have not much connection to who we are as a people. A lot of the money comes from outside. So it's been a challenge, I think, for local government, state, county, to be able to manage the influx of investment that comes to Hawaii in a way that creates sustainable growth. I think we have a much better handle on it today than we did 30, 40 years ago. But it's still a struggle.
George, you go through this all over the place.
Right.
I mean, and this idea of creating walkable communities, what's the trick? I mean, it's very difficult in the economic and land use patterns that we have.
I don't know if there's any trick, but and DPP's role is not economic development. So a lot of this is economics-driven kind of development. And what we control is, buildings, streetscapes, densities, and heights. But, at the end of the day, the built structure gives you just a structure. It doesn't necessarily, make it a livable community. I think we can help. We definitely can help by making sure that the amenities are there. But I know Donna talks about the lack of open space, and I agree that Central Kakaako is deficient in open space, although they have great Makai parks, but you have to walk a distance to get to them. So how you integrate those things, and it's one thing. Regulations can frame. We can't make it happen. You know, so this kind, when you talk about this kind of community, you can build the building, but can you force a grocery store there, or will market forces say it'll be a office use or something? That's much harder to regulate or control.
Yeah, Tony, I kind of wonder if that's exactly what people envisioned. Is it because there's this government entity that would be exactly what the government would do? Say, you know, as soon as we have this many things, we have to have a small shopping complex, or as soon as we have this many people, we have to have a park. Is there any of that kind of thinking going into the planning?
Well, before I answer that one, and you can hold me to that, how do we get people out of cars? How do we address the strip mall that's in Kapolei? Well, I'm going to tell you we already implemented the answer. The answer is not to use traditional Euclidean or use zoning. The answer is to use something like form-based code, which has as its objective creating very active streetscapes. How do we do that? We put the parking in the back or not on the main street. We bring the buildings and the windows, which you would typically think to do your window shopping, we bring it closer to the sidewalk. We make the sidewalk an engaging place where people can and will be obliged to leave their car behind. So that mechanism is already in place. Your second question, are we going to force things to happen? Well, again, we've created particular standards for each one of the particular neighborhoods in the area, and they are very particular. And so the heights are adjusted to that particular neighborhood, such as in central Kakaako, and do not, in large part, allow for building above 65 feet. And so in the larger development lots, again, we have, it is the market that will produce the demand for those services.
Okay, let me stop you right there, because I think that's exactly what Donna is saying is not working. Market forces alone don't generate those things, because market forces go to people wanting to make a lot of money.
Right. You have to start with a vision. I don't see a vision coming out of Kakaako. There's lots of visions in the development plans that go around this island. And those plans are put together by the people who live in the regions. They have visions of what they want their community and their area to look like. I don't see that. You had 12,000 people in Kakaako. I don't see that. I don't see that whole vision.
And so I'm going to have to beg to differ, because with our neighborhood standards and the fact that we took from 2003 to 2011 to establish with an EIS what that current plan and vision is that we're building to, which envisions that compact, walkable community, I'm going to have to disagree and say that there are particular standards that have been placed to that very tedious process to get to a point where we are articulating and it is a form and a template for the change that we envision to happen.
Hey, Peter, you know, thinking about your parcels, you're going to be hopefully the HCDA of Kakaako, Makai, or at least parts of it. What kind of pressures do you see yourself having to resist in order to have the vision that you're talking about?
Well, we pretty much have a general vision, and we certainly have a lot of statements of intention. You know, I brought a map. Can we look at the map?
I think so,
really
if our
quick?
director can pull this up. I don't want to spend too much time with very specific things, but go ahead.
Okay.
The map is there.
I'll go by this real. We own all the parcels in yellow with the red dots. On the far right is the Kewalo Harbor. All those parcels, A, B, C, D, K, all will not be, we're not going to do anything on those parcels that isn't already permitted. And the goal there is to create a system of commercial retail, public access, a promenade, which is all part of a community vision. We're asking for some residential on Lot E and Lot I along Alamana Boulevard, and some residential on Lot G and F. L is not quite sure what we're going to do there, but that is also one that we want to. So we want to create a mix in there of activity where we are talking about a people place where people want to come. We're willing to give some give backs, but the basis of the financial model has to include some residential, or we cannot afford to, as an example, create as much open space. So without the residential component, we will have to go highest and best use and build out commercial retail. And our residential effort at the legislature to get an exemption to the current ban is very controversial. People don't understand how the numbers have to work. We would rather not max out all of those lots. We'd rather be able to do some residential that allows us to leave expanses of open space and access to the ocean.
It sounds like you're sharing Tony's dilemma to a certain extent, aren't you? I mean, isn't that the same dilemma that planners for Kakaako would be? And going to Donna's point, that you've got in order to do nice things, you have to get money from somewhere.
Well, actually, in the 600 acres of the Kakaako Community Development District, the state actually owns, its holdings are primarily in the Makai area. And so when people talk about let's have a park in central Kakaako, we have to understand that those are all private land holdings, and we would be obliged, if we did do that, to displace those small businesses that we sought to take care of. So it is not the state imposing, in large part. In the Mauka area, in large part, you have private land holdings with which we seek to use our zoning powers to affect a pattern of settlement which we believe fits that plan and that community and those individual neighborhoods which we believe the people have asked for.
Okay, let me go back to some of the questions from our viewers, and I think they're going to take us through a part of the conversation that may be the most difficult, and that is about the decision-making process and potential influences on the decision-making process, who's making the process. One person that asks, how many individuals who are or will be buying these luxury Kakaako units actually work in Hawaii? Don't let Tony use 200 rental units to justify the thousands of luxury units. And another question is the place is starting to look like Hong Kong, too busy without enough systems. How many on the HCDA board live in Kakaako? And finally, and I apologize for this question because I am certainly not making any accusations, and neither is PBS, but the question is, who is getting bribed for all these projects being approved? So granted, that is a widely rhetorical question. There hasn't been any accusations of bribery at all, and we make that very clear, but there have been questions asked about what kind of influences are on the folks who are making these decisions. Donna, you tried to get to this point, and I'll let you go ahead.
Well, I did. When you go through the city system it's a fairer system. Each application has 3 hearings before the city council, the committee, and then it goes before the city council. And you go before elected officials. At HCDA, you go through appointed people. Now, the appointed board does not represent the community, doesn't even have a community member on it. So when you look at some of the interests that they have, a couple of the members there are related and have interest to developments, potential developments in the future.
So Tony, how do you handle that?
Well, one, Donna said no community representation.
believe
One of our
there is
members
one.
is a resident. There's 2 community representatives that were nominated by the city council. I need to talk about the zoning process. And George can chime in if we're wrong. We require hearings on every development that occurs. And if you look at the city process does not, there isn't a rezoning requirement. No hearing is required. So I'm going to suggest to you that I can provide all the information needed, that our process is much more comprehensive than the city, in that every development permit requires a hearing.
Peter,
Okay.
does that make you comfortable?
Yes,
That's good enough?
Sure.
One hearing?
yes.
Because I know the city, actually, when it comes to a rezoning, that actually has to go all the way to the city council.
And 3 readings of
So
it, yes.
I'm thinking we're talking about, because rezoning is where they do decide how dense some area is going to be.
If they seek a change. So for instance, George, correct me if I'm wrong, but on the Ala Moana Shopping Center proposed low-rise that was discussed, would that require rezoning?
No, it does not.
So if it does not require rezoning, then a unilateral agreement which might require givebacks on the part of the developer is not required. whereas in every development permit that is processed by the authority within Kakaako, we require a hearing and a very public process.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit about accountability, though. I mean, who holds who accountable for Kakaako and for interns? Who should we, if people are upset about what's happening in Kakaako, and I think you'd acknowledge that we're hearing a little bit more about Kakaako than we used to, who should they turn to? Who should they hold accountable for the decisions made about Kakaako?
I think it's very clearly the zoning decision-making is with the 9-member Kakaako Community Development Authority. And the buck stops there. It's not with me, it's with those 9 members. Those 9 members are obliged to adopt findings considering in a very public process what are the facts that are present, how they relate to the rules in place that govern development, and then issue a permit or not with or without conditions.
But this is an appointed board.
Yes.
And ultimately, are you saying that that board does not act based on what the appointing authority, in this case the governor, would want?
Well, remember, governor has 4 of his cabinet members who serve. There is one, he also has an at-large member. The county council provides 3 members from a list from which the governor must choose. There is a cultural specialist. So that's our 9. If you look at that, then the membership that are nominated by the governor are subject to advice and consent of the Senate. So the Senate certainly has an opportunity to weigh the credentials of those people brought to them. The statute currently names that 2 of the county nominations must be small businesses and 1 must be a resident. And so there are qualifications. And so from an accountability standard, you must perform or it's obviously you're not.
Donna?
Well,
I can just see you just quivering over there.
the nomination now to represent in the small business is associated with one of the proposed or potential developers in the area, and it's a big business. It's not when you think of small business, the average person thinks of the car repair, the mom and pop grocery store, not a big contract development company.
So, I mean, so what do you say?
That person is being put in representing small business, and I don't think that that's correct. It's a big company.
Okay, you're trying to be a little bit sly about this. I think what you are saying is that the governor is not necessarily choosing people who truly represent the community. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly, yeah.
Tony?
That member, I believe that Donna's speaking of, was nominated by the county council. A list of 3 is required by law to be given to the governor. The governor vets appropriately, and he does make his appointment, but it is subject to advice and consent of the Senate.
George,
so there is a check and balance.
Okay, thank you. George, your boss, the mayor, actually would like to have you as a regular member, or your position as a regular member of the HCDA.
I think that was a resolution that actually Kaika Anderson presented and the council passed, yeah.
So the mayor supported that?
Mayor supports that.
And so how do you feel things might be different if you were sitting on that board? Or someone representing the mayor was sitting on the board?
I think there would be probably a little bit more integration with the county functions and the surrounding lands.
So is that integration good enough now?
That's a loaded question. I mean, because actually, Tony and I have a good relationship. My department and HCDA work well together. So when you say, is it good enough? I mean, under the current situation, we work well together.
But maybe structurally, we could make the structure and the working together a little bit more easy. If you were on the board, for example.
Well, obviously, if I was on the board, I would have a more immediate pulse on the things and decisions that were being made. While I do have and Tony's staff is very good at giving me the hearing notices, so there's usually somebody in my staff attending the hearing. But as far as decision making goes, yes, we don't have any decision making authority in the review process.
Now, Peter, I mean, this is a question that goes beyond your role as a trustee and back into your history and your knowledge of local politics and all you've seen. Are you concerned at all about the way the decision-making process is structured? That is, who's being appointed, what it looks like to the general public, appearances, as well as actual decisions?
My biggest concern is information management. It's a huge challenge in public policy making, especially when you get down to nitty-gritty stuff. Sets of information just seems to fall out of the sky, and you have and there's no way to sort it out, especially if you're a layperson and a member of the general public, to be able to figure out, is Donna right? Is he right? Am I right? It's so again, I get back to informed decision making, and I say that because we on our 10 parcels are getting some pushback because the information is not being managed too well. We go out and say we're turning left, and then we see a sign that tells us we're turning right, and we go, well, how did that happen?
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
Let me a last question that I'm sure is going to take up our last few minutes, and this is based on several questions once again from our viewers. One, these buildings are supposed to be owner-occupant. How long do they have to wait before they can rent it out if they fail to comply? What is the penalty? Mike from Waikiki, politicians are not planners. I don't know, I think that's a pretty smart thing to say. Appears that development on Oahu is driven by campaign contributions. There should be restrictions on development in the country and control of the rent. Okay, a lot of points on that from Mike. And question for the panel, who's buying these 4,000 plus units in the works? Locals, mainland, people from Asia? And that's Dwayne via Twitter. So, Tony, how do we ensure that over time this doesn't just become an investor's paradise and is not, a place for us and people who would otherwise be forced to buy a house or enjoy buying a house out in Eva or Kunia? How do we make sure that this stays a place where it serves the public through its resource?
With respect to market units, it is typically willing buyer, willing seller type of situation. We do have information on what the many of the units that are sold. We will ask for the zip code, for instance, of the seller. When you have qualified income units, by and large, it's the expectation is that they will be a resident, although from a housing discrimination standpoint, I think we're very careful about that. The 1,000 units at 801 South Street, for instance, a very controversial project intended to serve workforce housing needs. 1,000 units. I would guess and venture that there is nary a foreign investor in there because this is a very Spartan but unique opportunity for fee simple ownership, but minus the swimming pool, minus the rec deck, and at very modest size units. So not that much foreign investment.
But that's because of the quality units or because of the regulation on the units?
It's quite frankly, to me, the market pressure. Would you pay a price for a unit that does not feature X amount of amenities and is marketed for that, but a market buyer? This one is marketed for a workforce, a family of 4 in a 3-bedroom unit, a smaller family in a 2-bedroom unit. So from a sales history standpoint, this particular developer has attracted, I believe, exclusive local clientele.
Okay, let me take this around the panel really fast. We started with our question, how do we feel about what's going on with Kakaako? We've got about a minute and a half left. Let me start, George, summing up a little bit what you've heard. What do you think the message should be to the public on the answer to that question? How's Kakaako going?
I would say that in a qualified way, it is going in the direction that it was envisioned 40 years ago when the law was enacted. You can argue about certain elements, but in the whole, it is going as envisioned at the time.
Peter?
I would agree with that statement. I do think, though, that Donna raises some good points, and the challenge is to try to make some amendments to the vision so that the real neighborhoods occur.
Donna?
Well, obviously,
Only
I
about
don't think
20
it's
seconds
going.
now.
I don't think it's going in the right direction. When you can claim that a lobby is a part of an open space, or a deck, pool deck, on the 10th floor is part of an open space in Kakaako, Makai. A green space is because it's in front of the building next to a sidewalk, and there's no parks, and there's no schools, or there's no land given for schools. That is not going in the right direction.
Tony, your expectation now?
My expectation is that the agency has to be a part of the solution to provide housing opportunities for both local and resident, for sale and rental, that we have to provide community amenities that would then justify living and giving up the white picket fence and the urban sprawl. And I believe we are required to be accountable and transparent to that, and we will be continually held to that standard, and it's something that we must expect.
Okay, thank you very much. It's been a great panel. Thanks, everybody. Next time on Insights, our state poses unique transit challenges for businesses attempting to ship goods and workers between our islands. Sports teams must raise hundreds of dollars to attend competitions away from their home. And now, with another airline departing our marketplace and the super ferry a distant memory, some in the community are wondering what will become of inter-island connectivity. On the next Insights on PBS Hawaii, how can inter-island travel be more accessible? That's next Thursday on Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff. Ahui ho.